I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. My name is Piper, and I was 24 when everything in my life fell apart. Back then, I had what most people would consider a solid setup: a stable job as a manager at a reputable company, my own apartment, and a boyfriend I was crazy about. His name was Jake, and we'd been together for 6 months. It felt like we had known each other forever. He was charming, successful, and seemed to check all the boxes. We could talk for hours about anything and everything, and it always felt easy. We made plans for the future, and it was like I was living in a dream. One evening, as we sat cuddled up on my couch, watching some mindless Netflix show, I told him, "I think it's time you meet my family." I had no doubt they would love him. "Even Emma will have to admit you're perfect." Emma was my sister, 22, fresh out of college, and still figuring things out. We'd always been close despite the 2-year age gap, but lately she seemed distant. I chalked it up to the stress of post-graduation life and her frustration with the job hunt. We arranged a family dinner for the following weekend. I spent hours getting ready, wanting everything to be perfect. Jake showed up with wine and flowers, which had my mom grinning from ear to ear the moment he walked in. "Oh, Piper," she whispered to me as she pulled me into the kitchen. "He's absolutely wonderful, such good manners, and so handsome." I noticed Emma roll her eyes and let out a small, exaggerated snort from her place at the counter, but I ignored it. She was probably just jealous that I seemed to have everything together while she was still trying to find her footing. The evening went better than expected. My dad and Jake bonded over their shared love of golf, and my mom couldn't stop praising his career achievements. Even Emma seemed to soften a little as the night wore on. As we were leaving, Mom gave me a tight hug and whispered in my ear, "Don't let this one get away, sweetheart." In the weeks that followed, Jake and I began talking about marriage. It wasn't a grand proposal, more of a natural conversation that just happened over dinner one night. "We could do it in 6 months," Jake suggested, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Nothing too fancy, just family and close friends." My parents were thrilled when we told them, practically jumping out of their seats. They immediately insisted on paying for half the wedding, with Jake's parents covering the other half. Emma stayed quiet during the whole conversation, occasionally making little annoyed noises under her breath, but I just brushed it off. She was probably just upset that everything was falling into place for me, while she was still in limbo. The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding preparations, deciding on flowers, cake tastings, venue visits, endless meetings with vendors. It felt like I was juggling my job with planning every little detail of the wedding. I stayed late at the office more often than I'd like, trying to meet with our wedding planner. One Tuesday, the day started like any other. I had a morning meeting with the florist and was supposed to work late again to finalize the reception timeline, but by 2 p.m., a splitting headache hit me, and my boss immediately sent me home. I figured I'd surprise Jake. He usually worked from home on Tuesdays, and I thought we could order takeout and have a quiet evening together, maybe even tackle some wedding tasks that had been piling up. The apartment was eerily quiet when I unlocked the door. I assumed Jake was on a work call, which he often did in the bedroom for better sound quality. But when I opened the door, I froze. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was Jake, tangled up in the sheets with Emma, my sister, my fiance. In our bed, time seemed to stop. My whole world narrowed down to that single moment, that single image, burned into my memory forever. Emma didn't even look ashamed. She stared at me as if I were the one who had interrupted something insignificant. "Piper." Jake scrambled to get up. "Baby, I can explain." Something inside me snapped. I couldn't speak. Without a word, I walked to the closet, grabbed their clothes, and marched straight to the balcony. "Piper, no!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. I'd already thrown their clothes over the railing, watching with grim satisfaction as they scattered across the parking lot below. "Get out," I said, my voice disturbingly calm. "Both of you. Now." Emma, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, wrapped herself in a sheet from our bed and shuffled toward the door barefoot. It would have been almost funny if I didn't feel like I was dying inside. Once they were gone, I slammed the door behind them and collapsed against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. I don't know how long I sat there trying to process what had just happened. The sun was setting when my phone rang. It was Mom. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Maybe she was calling to comfort me, to tell me everything would be okay. I was wrong. "How dare you humiliate your sister like that?" she hissed as soon as I answered. "Throwing her clothes out the window and making her walk out in a sheet. What were you thinking?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What was I thinking? What was she thinking? She was in bed with my fiance. "You're always so dramatic, Piper," Mom continued. "This is exactly why—" I cut her off, my voice stronger than I felt. "The wedding is canceled. I'll contact the vendors tomorrow." "No, you won't," she interrupted, her tone unnervingly calm. "The wedding is still happening. Your father and I talked it over with Jake's parents. We spoke with Jake and Emma, too. The wedding will proceed as planned. Emma will take your place." 5 words. 5 simple words. They hit me like a physical blow. I actually checked to see if I was bleeding. Surely something that painful must leave a mark. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "That's insane. You can't just—" "We've paid for half the wedding," Mom cut in. "Jake's parents have paid for their half. Everything is booked and paid for. We're not throwing all that money away just because you're having a tantrum." "A tantrum?" My voice rose with each word. "My fiance and my sister were in my bed. How is that a tantrum?" she sighed, as if I were a child refusing to share my toys. "You need to grow up and stop being so emotional about everything. These things happen." The line went dead. I don't remember much of that night. I know I cried until I had no tears left. I know I screamed into my pillows until my throat was raw. I know I threw up twice. My body was physically rejecting the betrayal. The next morning, I woke up curled on the bathroom floor, still in the clothes I'd worn yesterday. My phone had been buzzing nonstop, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. Finally, around 9:12 a.m., I saw my cousin Sarah's name flash on the screen. "Piper," she said, her voice hesitant, "I just got off the phone with your mom." She paused, struggling to find the right words. "She's been calling everyone in the family." My stomach dropped. "What's she saying?" "She's telling everyone that Jake broke up with you because he fell in love with Emma," Sarah explained. "She's saying it was all very civil and mature, but you're not handling it well." I closed my eyes, willing myself not to throw up again. "What else?" "She's telling everyone not to contact you. They say you're behaving inappropriately and need time to process things properly." I leaned against the bathroom tiles, the cold surface pressing into my forehead. My family was being turned against me. They were protecting Emma, my cheating, betraying sister. They were isolating me, casting me aside. Fury burned through me, but it wasn't the destructive kind. I made my decision right then and there, curled up on that bathroom floor. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a scandal. I wouldn't cry, scream, or beg. I would simply disappear from their lives as completely as they had erased me from theirs. The next day, I walked into my boss Karen's office before she'd even had her first coffee. "I need more work," I told her, standing tall despite the exhaustion pulling at my bones. "The most challenging projects you've got. I want them all." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Piper, you're already handling a full load, and with the wedding?" "There is no wedding," I cut her off, "and I need to be busier, much busier." Something in my expression must have convinced her because she pulled a thick file from her drawer. "The Thompson account. Nobody's been able to crack it. It's yours if you want it. I found a new apartment that weekend, a small studio across town. I changed my phone number, blocked every family member on social media, and threw myself into work like it was the only life raft in a vast ocean of pain. The Thompson account? I cracked it in 2 weeks. The Impossible Miller project? Completed a month ahead of schedule. Every challenge Karen threw at me, I conquered. I worked 14-hour days, took online courses at night, and studied our competitors like my life depended on it. Working was the only thing that kept me from thinking about them, about how Emma and Jake were probably living their happily ever after in the house we'd planned to buy. about how my parents were probably doting on their good daughter while telling everyone what a shame it was about their eldest. A year passed. I got promoted to senior manager. Another year, and I was the director of operations. By the third year, I was the youngest vice president in the company's history. My salary tripled. I bought a gorgeous apartment in the city center, the kind Jake and I used to walk past and dream about. But I bought it on my own, with my own money. And every time I walked through those doors, I felt a fierce pride that had nothing to do with anyone else. I started traveling. Small weekend trips at first, then bigger ones. Paris in the spring, Tokyo in the fall, the Greek islands in summer. I posted photos of it all on Instagram, not to show off, but to remind myself how far I'd come. 3 years. 3 years of not hearing their voices, not sitting at their dinner table, not knowing anything about their lives except for one fact I couldn't escape. Emma had married Jake. I heard it from Sarah, who mentioned it casually during one of our rare text exchanges, probably testing to see if I'd react. I didn't. I was happy, really happy. Not the kind of happiness I thought I had with Jake, which had been all about pleasing other people and fitting into their expectations. This was a deeper, more authentic contentment, one that came from knowing exactly who I was and what I was capable of, or at least I thought I was happy. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The number was unknown. For some reason, I decided to pick it up. Hello? Piper? Sweetheart, is that you? It was my mother's voice. That saccharine sweetness made my teeth ache. She was speaking as though we'd just talked yesterday, like nothing had ever happened. What do you want? I kept my voice neutral, professional, the same tone I used in board meetings. There was a slight crack in her cheerful tone. Your father and I, we need to talk to you. Could you come to the house, please? I should have hung up. I should have blocked the number like all the others, but instead I heard myself say, "When? Saturday around 6? I'll make your favorite dinner." "Fine," she said, before I hung up on her. That week dragged by. I threw myself into work even harder than usual, trying not to think about the upcoming visit. The Saturday appointment loomed like an accusation. When the day arrived, I spent an hour getting ready, my hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, designer outfit carefully chosen. If I was walking into the lion's den, I was going to do it looking like someone they couldn't touch anymore. Driving through my old neighborhood was strange. When I pulled up to my parents' house, I barely recognized it. The place looked tired, worn down. The garden, which my mom had once prided herself on, was overgrown. The paint was peeling, and the front steps needed repair. I didn't knock. This wasn't a social call. The house hit me like a wave of memories I wasn't prepared for. The same furniture, the same photos on the walls, though I noticed they'd removed all the ones with me in them. Even the same smell of Mom's vanilla candles, and there they were, arranged like some twisted family portrait. My parents, looking older and more tired than I remembered, Emma with 2 small children clinging to her legs, one about 2, the other barely a year old, and Jake standing beside her, hand on her shoulder, looking exactly the same except for a slight punch around his middle. I waited for the pain, the rage, the overwhelming emotions that nearly destroyed me 3 years ago. But there was nothing. They were strangers to me now, irrelevant as the peeling wallpaper behind them. Emma eyed my outfit, my bag, my carefully curated appearance. "You look good," she said, envy dripping from every word. I smiled, all teeth. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you don't waste time plotting to steal other people's fiancés," my mother cut in. "Please, everyone, let's just sit down and have a nice dinner." I picked at the overcooked chicken on my plate, not really hungry but needing something to focus on besides the awkward silence. The children, my supposed niece and nephew, were the only ones making any noise. The younger one was banging a spoon against his high chair, while the older one whined about his peas. Mom cleared her throat. "We've been following your success, Piper. Those photos you post, that apartment of yours right in the heart of downtown, it's beautiful." I took a sip of water and didn't respond. "And your job? Vice president? We're so impressed with how well you're doing." She glanced at Emma, who was staring at her plate. "Why am I here?" I finally put my fork down. Mom's smile faltered slightly. She pushed her food around her plate before speaking again. "Well, you see, things have been a bit difficult lately." My dad spoke up, looking older than his years. "I lost my job 3 months ago. Budget cuts. After 30 years with the company, I've had to pick up extra shifts at the hospital." Mom jumped in quickly. "To keep up with the bills, the mortgage, utilities, everything's so expensive these days." I waited for them to get to the point. "And of course," Mom continued, "with Emma staying home with the kids." She gestured toward Emma, who was now trying to clean something off her younger child's face. "They're managing on just Jake's salary, but with 2 little ones." I finally put it together. They were leading up to this. "Exactly what does any of this have to do with me?" I asked, though I was starting to see where this was going. Mom brightened, apparently missing or choosing to ignore my tone. "Well, we were thinking Emma really needs to find a job, but childcare is so expensive these days, and since you have such a flexible position..." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "Are you..." I started laughing. "Are you seriously suggesting that I should babysit for them?" My mother continued. "You have that big apartment, and I'm sure you could work from home some days. The children are really well behaved." The 2-year-old chose that moment to throw his sippy cup across the room, screaming at the top of his lungs, "This is a joke, right?" I looked around the table. "You're not actually asking me to babysit the children of my sister and my ex-fiancé?" "Well," Dad cleared his throat, "if you're not comfortable with that arrangement, you could help pay for a proper babysitter. Given your salary..." I sat back, genuinely amazed at their audacity. They had invited me here to serve me this, Mom's mediocre cooking, all to ask me to either play nanny to my sister's kids or open my wallet for them. "No," I said, standing up. "Absolutely not. I will not be your babysitter, and I will not be your ATM." Mom's concerned mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "How dare you be so selfish after everything we've done for you?" Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the plates rattle. "You ungrateful, greedy girl. You're sitting there in your designer clothes, living in your luxury apartment while your sister can barely afford diapers." "My sister's financial situation is not my problem," I said, my voice cold. "You all made your choices 3 years ago. You chose her, you chose him. You made it very clear where your loyalties lay. Now you get to live with those choices." I turned and walked out to the sound of their screaming voices following me down the driveway. Jake was silent, but I could hear my parents calling me every name in the book, while Emma wailed about her children. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Mom had posted a lengthy screed on Facebook about her heartless daughter who had forgotten her roots and abandoned her struggling family in their time of need. The comments started rolling in immediately. How could she be so cruel to her own sister? Those poor babies need their aunt. Money changes people. These comments came from relatives who had witnessed the whole drama unfold 3 years ago. Yet here they were, piling on, sending me private messages about how I needed to get over it and help my family. I blocked them all. Every single one. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They disappeared from my social media one by one. I didn't bother explaining or defending myself. They had chosen their side long ago. But my family wasn't done. I was in the middle of a meeting with our biggest client when my assistant burst in looking panicked. "Miss Parker, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but your family is in the lobby. Your sister has 2 crying children with her, and your parents are demanding to speak to Mr. Davidson." I apologized to my client and rushed to the lobby. Sure enough, there they were. Mom and Dad making a scene at the reception desk. While Emma stood there with both kids, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I approached the scene. Mom and Dad were standing at the front desk, shouting, waving their arms like they were on a mission. Emma was holding both kids, the older one screaming and thrashing in her arms, while the younger one was wailing in his high chair. People in the lobby were staring, their phones out, recording everything. It felt like I was watching my life turn into a reality show that I didn't sign up for. Piper, we need to talk, my dad bellowed, his voice carrying across the lobby. She can't treat her family like this. We'll see what her boss has to say about this. I could feel the heat rising in my face. My fingers tightened into fists at my sides. I was so beyond done with them, but I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. I walked up to Marcus, the head of security, who was already moving toward the situation. He looked at me for a moment, sensing the tension, then gave a small nod. "Those people are not allowed in this building," I said, my voice calm but firm. Marcus didn't hesitate. He turned and started making his way over to Mom and Dad, the usual courtesy gone from his face. "Please remove them," I added, just to be clear. "Don't let them back in." I watched, an odd sense of relief washing over me, as Marcus escorted them out of the building. They didn't go quietly. Dad was still shouting, Emma was still trying to control the chaos of her kids, and people were still recording. But Marcus handled it with ease, as though it was routine. Once they were out of sight, I turned back to my client, who was still sitting in the conference room. I apologized quickly and returned to the meeting, my mind a little scattered but trying to focus on the task at hand. I couldn't stop thinking about the chaos in the lobby, though. It felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that no matter how far I had come, no matter how much I had built for myself, my family still saw me as the one who should give in to their demands. It didn't end there. That evening, when I got home, I found them outside my building. My heart sank when I saw Emma with the kids again, standing there as if she had every right to be there. The two little ones were clinging to her, still crying. My parents were standing a little behind her, looking like they were preparing for some sort of battle. They were blocking the entrance, stopping people from going in and out of the building, making a scene. I stood frozen in my doorway for a moment, feeling the rage build up inside me. I knew they wouldn't stop until I gave in, but I wasn't going to let them break me again. I called building security and explained the situation. It felt surreal, like my life had turned into something I couldn't recognize. Why couldn't they just leave me alone? Why couldn't they respect the boundaries I had set? As I waited, I started to feel the weight of the situation. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming. They were using the kids as emotional blackmail, expecting me to fold just because they knew how much I cared about family. But they had made their choices. They had chosen Emma. They had chosen Jake. Now, they had to live with that. A few minutes later, security arrived. I watched from my window as they cleared my family out of the building. I could hear my parents shouting, Emma trying to calm the kids, but the security guards were firm. They didn't allow anyone into the building without proper authorization. They weren't going to let them harass me anymore. Still, the pressure didn't let up. They weren't done yet. The following week, things got even worse. My phone started ringing off the hook again. First, it was my cousin Sarah, who had remained neutral through everything. She called to give me a heads up about what was going on. "Piper," she said hesitantly, "I'm just trying to help you prepare for this." "Prepare for what?" I replied, confused. "Your family. They're going to keep coming at you. They've reached out to everyone, asking for help. They've even started contacting your co-workers, telling them you're ignoring your responsibilities as a daughter and a sister. They're trying to paint you as the villain." I couldn't believe it. They were using my reputation at work as some kind of leverage, hoping to get me to cave in. The realization hit me hard. My family was willing to sacrifice me for their own gain. They didn't care about what I had been through, about the betrayal that I had been forced to face. They only cared about what I could do for them. Fury bubbled up inside me again, but it wasn't the kind of rage that made me want to scream. It was controlled, like a pressure building beneath the surface. They were testing me, seeing how far they could push me before I broke, and I was done breaking. I called Sarah back and thanked her for the warning. I didn't want to involve her in the mess any further, but I needed to know what else was happening. "They're relentless," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "They're saying you don't care about family, that you're too caught up in your own life to even pick up the phone." It hurt to hear it, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't let them see how much they were affecting me. The more they pushed, the harder I became. I was no longer the girl they could manipulate. I wasn't the daughter they could guilt trip into helping them, so I did what I had to do. I blocked everyone. My parents, Emma, the extended family, anyone who had any connection to them. It wasn't out of spite. It was for my own sanity. I couldn't let them drag me back into their twisted narrative. But that wasn't the end of their campaign. They didn't stop there. I received a call from Sarah a few days later. "Piper, you need to prepare yourself. They've escalated things. They're going to start showing up at your office. They're desperate, and I'm worried they might do something worse." I knew it was coming. It wasn't enough to harass me online or in person. They were coming for my job now. They were going to try and make me the villain in front of my colleagues, to make me feel like I owed them something. I didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them with anger or rage. I wasn't going to let them destroy me like they had tried to 3 years ago. No, this time I was going to protect myself in a different way. I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Michelle Torres, and from the moment I spoke to her, I knew she was exactly what I needed. Tough, no nonsense, and completely unfazed by family drama. She had handled cases like this before, and she was going to help me make sure my family stayed out of my life for good. Michelle got to work right away. She helped me gather evidence, screenshots of messages, security footage from my building, witness statements from my colleagues and doormen. Every attempt my family had made to contact me after being told to stop, she collected it all. "The harassment is clear," Michelle explained as we prepared for court. "We're going for a restraining order. We'll also be seeking $115,000 in damages for emotional distress and reputation damage." I wasn't prepared for what happened next. When we went to court, it was like seeing my family in a new light. They looked small and insignificant under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Emma wasn't even there with her kids this time, though she still managed to cry on cue when it was her turn to testify. Their defense was weak. Something about how they just wanted me to reconnect with them, how they were worried about me. They made it sound so harmless, but the judge wasn't buying it. "The evidence of harassment is clear and substantial," the judge said in his ruling. "The restraining order is granted in full. No contact, direct or indirect. The court also awards the requested damages of $115,000. Mom jumped up, shouting, "We're her parents! We have rights! You ungrateful trash!" Dad joined in, but Emma was already in hysterics, crying about her kids again. The judge's gavel cracked down like a gunshot. "One more outburst and I'll hold you all in contempt." He didn't have to say more. They were done. The restraining order was granted. My family was legally prohibited from contacting me, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew they wouldn't be able to hurt me anymore. They couldn't invade my life or try to manipulate me. From that moment on, my life became mine again. I didn't think about them anymore. What they were doing, how they were living, was none of my concern. It's been 6 months since the court ruling, and I haven't heard from them once. I'm living my life on my terms, doing things I love, and focusing on my work. I bought the apartment of my dreams and continued to rise in my career. I no longer care about revenge. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I've already won. I wake up every day in my peaceful apartment, go to work at a job I love, and live my life. That's more than enough for me. Life after the court hearing was quieter. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I'd closed that chapter, shut the door on my past, and locked it behind me. I was finally free of all the noise, the manipulation, the constant feeling of being dragged through the mud by people who were supposed to love me. Work was my anchor. It had always been my safe place, but now it felt like my only refuge from the chaos. I threw myself into it more than ever before, pushing myself to accomplish things I hadn't thought possible. I had goals now, things I wanted to achieve that had nothing to do with anyone else. The Thompson account was just the beginning. In the following months, I cracked a few more projects that had been considered impossible before. My name started getting recognized more and more around the office, and Karen, my boss, couldn't stop singing my praises. I was doing well, better than I'd ever imagined. But there was still that part of me, that quiet, nagging feeling, telling me I wasn't quite there yet. I hadn't healed. Not completely. It wasn't that I missed my family. No, it was more the idea of them, of the life I thought I would have with them. I realized I wasn't just mourning the loss of my parents and sister. I was mourning the future they'd stolen from me, the life I'd imagined for myself with Jake, the wedding, the house we'd planned to buy, the family dinners we'd have, the holidays we'd spend together. It was all gone. And it hurt, more than I wanted to admit. I spent a lot of time reflecting on who I had become, what I'd turned into. I wasn't the same girl who had spent hours planning every detail of that perfect wedding. I wasn't the same person who had believed in love and loyalty without question. No, I had become someone else, a version of myself that was stronger, colder, and more self-reliant. And while I had learned to appreciate this new me, there was still a piece of me that wished things had been different. I kept pushing through. I kept working, achieving, building. But even success didn't fill the void they left behind. And then came the call. It was a random Tuesday afternoon, just like the day everything had shattered. The phone rang and the number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something told me to pick it up. Maybe it was curiosity or maybe it was some strange intuition. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady but cautious. "Piper? Sweetheart, is that you?" I almost dropped the phone. It was my mother. Her voice was sickeningly sweet, just like before. The kind of voice that makes your skin crawl because it feels so fake, so rehearsed. But I didn't let it get to me. I'd built this armor around myself, and I wasn't going to let her break through it now. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice firm. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully, trying to sound like everything was okay, like nothing had happened. Your father and I, well, we need to talk. Could you come over to the house? We've had some serious discussions about you, about everything." I felt my stomach tighten. I knew what was coming, but I wasn't prepared for it. Not after everything. Not after the years I'd spent healing, cutting ties, and living my life without them. I didn't hang up, though. I couldn't. There was something morbidly intriguing about it. Maybe it was the idea that they thought I would come crawling back, like they always expected. Or maybe, deep down, I was still holding on to the slimmest hope that somehow, after all this time, they would see the damage they had done and apologize. I didn't want to go, but something pushed me to say, "Saturday, around 6, I'll come by." It felt like an eternity until Saturday rolled around. I spent the week working even harder than usual, trying to distract myself from the inevitable. I couldn't let my mind wander to what was going to happen at that dinner. I couldn't let myself think too much about the past because I knew it would only hurt. When the day came, I spent an hour getting ready, carefully curating my outfit, making sure my hair was perfect, my makeup flawless. I wanted to show them that I had moved on, that I was fine without them. It wasn't for them, though. It was for me. I needed to walk in there with my head held high, with the confidence I had built over the past 3 years. As I drove through my old neighborhood, memories flooded back. The streets I used to walk down, the houses I had once imagined growing old in, all of it seemed so distant now. When I pulled up to my parents' house, I barely recognized it. The paint was peeling, the garden was overgrown, and the house looked tired, worn out. It was like they had stopped caring. It made sense, though. They had stopped caring about me years ago. They'd replaced me, moved on to their perfect little family, and that was that. I didn't knock when I got to the door. It wasn't a social visit. This was a confrontation. The house hit me like a wave of nostalgia I wasn't prepared for. It smelled the same, like vanilla candles and old furniture. The photos on the walls were mostly the same too, except for the ones with me in them. Those had been taken down. I didn't care. I wouldn't let them have that power over me anymore. And there they were, my parents, looking older and more worn out than I remembered. Emma, with 2 kids clinging to her legs, one was about 2, the other barely a year old, and then Jake, standing beside her. His hand was on her shoulder like they were some happy family. He looked the same except for a slight belly that had developed over the years. The sight of them, all of them, made me feel like I was standing outside of my own life. They were strangers to me now, people I used to know but no longer recognized. They were part of a past I had buried, a past that was trying to claw its way back into my present. Emma eyed me carefully, probably trying to figure out how I'd react. "You look good," she said, her voice dripping with envy. I couldn't help but smile. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes, a smile that said everything I needed to say without uttering a word. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you don't waste time plotting to steal other people's fiancés." Mom quickly cut in, trying to steer the situation back to calmer waters. "Please, let's just sit down and have a nice dinner. We don't need to—" I didn't let her finish. "Why am I here, Mom?" I asked, placing my fork down, my voice cutting through the tension. "What is this really about?" Mom's smile faltered. She looked down at her plate, pushing the food around before she spoke again. "Well, things have been difficult lately," she said, her tone shifting. "Your father, well, he lost his job 3 months ago. Budget cuts. After 30 years with the company, he's had to pick up extra shifts at the hospital. We've been struggling to keep up with bills and the mortgage." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. I knew what was coming next. This was the moment they were going to ask for something from me, something I had worked so hard to leave behind. And with Emma staying home with the kids, Mom continued, nodding toward my sister, who was now trying to wrangle the kids into their seats, "we were thinking, well, it would be really helpful if you could help out." I already knew where this was going. I could feel my patience running out. I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to fall into their trap. Not again. "What exactly are you asking for?" I asked, my voice flat, controlled. Mom looked at me, a slight glimmer of hope in her eyes. "We know you have that big apartment and your job is so flexible. We thought, maybe you could help with the kids. Babysit for a few days a week." I almost choked on my water. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was asking me to babysit the children of my sister and my ex-fiancé, the 2 people who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. "Are you serious?" I asked, staring at her in disbelief. "You're asking me to babysit? You're asking me to give up my time, my life, to take care of your kids?" My father jumped in, clearly annoyed. "If you're not comfortable with that arrangement, you could always help out financially. You know, pay for a proper babysitter. Given your salary, that shouldn't be an issue." The audacity. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I kept it under control. I had learned how to manage my emotions, how to keep them from controlling me. "No," I said, standing up from the table. "I will not be your babysitter. I will not be your ATM." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Mom's mask slipped, and I could see the anger beneath it. "How dare you be so selfish?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the plates rattle. "Ungrateful girl!" he shouted. "You sit there in your designer clothes in your fancy apartment while your sister can't even afford diapers." "I'm not responsible for her situation," I replied, my voice cold. "You all made your choices. 3 years ago, you chose her. You chose him. You made it clear where your loyalties lie. Now, you get to live with those choices." I turned and walked out, the sound of their screams echoing behind me. Jake had stayed silent as usual, but I could hear my parents calling me names, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in their lives. Emma wailed about her children, making it sound like I was the villain in their story. But I didn't care. I was done. I thought that would be the last I saw of them, but I was wrong. The next morning, my phone started buzzing again. This time, it was worse than before. Mom had posted a long message on Facebook, painting me as a heartless, selfish daughter who had abandoned her struggling family. The comments rolled in fast. Relatives, friends, people who had witnessed everything 3 years ago, all piling on. I blocked them all. I didn't need to explain myself. They had already chosen their side. It was a weird kind of numbness that settled over me after the Facebook post. I thought it would shake me, maybe make me second-guess my decisions, but it didn't. Instead, it reinforced everything I had already known deep down. They didn't care about me, not really. They cared about what I could do for them, what role I could play in their lives. They didn't understand me. They didn't respect me, and they never would. So I blocked every one of them. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them. Every single one. I didn't care about defending myself anymore. I didn't need to explain. They had already made their choices, and I had made mine. My choice was to move forward. I wasn't going to get dragged back into their toxic web. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, let them. I knew the truth. But that didn't stop them from escalating. It didn't take long for them to come at me again. The next time it wasn't through social media or calls. It was face to face. I was in a meeting with our biggest client, going over some final details before we closed a major deal. Everything was going smoothly. I was in the zone, running through the numbers and logistics, when my assistant burst into the room, looking panicked. "Miss Parker, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but your family is in the lobby. Your sister has 2 crying children with her, and your parents are demanding to speak to Mr. Davidson." My mind went blank for a second. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Not again. Not here. Not now. My stomach dropped. I didn't know how they had found me, but there they were, making a scene, trying to make me feel guilty, trying to force their way back into my life. "Are they causing a scene?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "They're shouting, making threats," my assistant said, her voice barely above a whisper, clearly nervous. "They're saying you've been treating them unfairly, and that they need to speak to someone in charge about this." I sighed. The audacity was beyond anything I could have imagined. My family was here, in my workplace, trying to publicly humiliate me. It was like they had no boundaries, no understanding of personal space. They didn't care about what I had worked so hard for, or the life I had built for myself. All they cared about was getting their way. I stood up and excused myself from the meeting. I didn't have time for this. Not now. Not ever. I went straight to the lobby, my steps deliberate, every inch of me composed. When I saw them, I felt that old fury bubble up in my chest, but I quickly tamped it down. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not this time. There they were. Mom and Dad, standing at the reception desk, still shouting. Emma was holding both kids, looking stressed but not apologetic, her eyes darting nervously around. And behind them, like some twisted shadow, was Jake. He was standing there with that same blank look on his face, his hand resting on Emma's shoulder like he still had any right to be there. My heart felt like it was sinking to the pit of my stomach. The sight of them, together, was like a slap in the face, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't going to let them tear me apart again. I walked up to Marcus, the head of security, who was already heading toward the scene. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and then back at my family. I gave him a nod, and he turned immediately to handle it. "Those people are not allowed in this building," I said, my voice steady, cold even. "Please remove them." Marcus didn't hesitate. He walked over to my family, and within moments, they were being escorted out of the building. Mom and Dad were still shouting, calling me every name in the book, but I didn't flinch. I didn't even look back as they were led out. Emma didn't say a word. She was clutching the kids, her face pale as she followed them out. I went back to the meeting like nothing had happened. I didn't let the interruption affect my focus. My client was still there, and I had a job to do. I couldn't afford to let their drama invade my professional space, but as soon as the meeting ended, I felt drained, exhausted in a way I couldn't explain. I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. They wouldn't stop. I spent the next few days on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. It felt like they were everywhere, lurking in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. I started taking different routes home, varying my schedule, just to avoid the chance of running into them. I even changed the locks on my apartment for extra peace of mind. I didn't trust them anymore, not even a little. But then, a week later, it happened. Again. I came home from work, tired and ready to relax for the evening, when I saw them, sitting right outside my building's entrance. Emma was there, with both kids again. My parents were standing behind her, looking like they were preparing for a battle. I stood there for a moment, frozen, before my mind snapped into action. I knew I had to take control. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like this was my problem. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. Not in my apartment, not in my space. I called building security, and within minutes, they were on their way. I could hear my family shouting from outside, but I didn't respond. I didn't want to give them anything. The thought of them standing there, using those poor kids to guilt-trip me, made my blood boil, but I couldn't let them see that. I was stronger than that. When security arrived, they did their job. They moved my family off the property, but not without a scene. Mom and Dad were still shouting, demanding to speak to me, but I ignored them. Emma was standing quietly off to the side, looking defeated. Maybe it was because she knew I wasn't going to cave. She had already won once before. She knew I wouldn't let that happen again. The next day, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had taken control. I had set my boundaries and made sure they were respected, but that wasn't the end of their campaign. The following week, I got a call from Sarah. She was always the one to reach out when things started getting messy with the family. She'd stayed neutral, and we had a kind of understanding about it all. "Piper," she said, her voice tentative, "I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but your family is starting to go after you in a different way. They're contacting your coworkers. They're telling them that you're ignoring your responsibilities as a daughter and that you need to be reconnected with your family." I felt a chill run down my spine. They were going to try to make me the villain at work too? They had no shame, no boundaries. I knew they were trying to make me feel like the bad guy, like I was being unreasonable, but I had nothing to feel guilty about. I thanked Sarah for the heads up and hung up. The anger inside me simmered again, but this time it didn't overwhelm me. I knew what I had to do. I contacted a lawyer. Michelle Torres was the one Sarah recommended. She was tough, experienced, and unflinching in the face of family drama. She helped me start putting things in motion. We gathered every piece of evidence we could find: messages, photos, footage from security cameras, witness statements from my coworkers who had seen the harassment firsthand. "We're going to file for a restraining order," Michelle told me, "and we'll be asking for damages too. Emotional distress, reputation damage, they're crossing a line and it's time they face the consequences." It was a strange feeling, taking legal action against my own family, but I knew it was the only way to stop them from continuously harassing me. I couldn't let them keep violating my boundaries. They needed to understand that their behavior had consequences. The day of the hearing, I was nervous but resolute. I wasn't going to let them bully me anymore. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and impersonal. Michelle and I sat at one table while my family sat at the other. They looked smaller under the bright lights, less threatening. Emma wasn't with her kids this time. She was sitting there, tearful as always, trying to play the victim. But it didn't work. Their defense was weak, just a bunch of excuses and hollow words about trying to reconnect with me. The judge didn't buy it. "The evidence of harassment is clear and substantial," the judge said, his voice firm. "The restraining order is granted in full. No contact, direct or indirect. The court also awards the requested damages of $115,000. It felt like the final nail in the coffin. It was over. They were done. Mom screamed when the ruling was announced, and Dad tried to argue. Emma dissolved into hysterics, crying about her children. The scene was almost laughable if it hadn't been so pathetic. But I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel the need for revenge. I just felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. My family was gone from my life. For good. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. My life was mine again. No more manipulation, no more guilt, no more living in their shadow. It's been months since then, and I haven't heard from them at all. I've moved on. I don't care what they're doing now. They've been erased from my life, and I'm better for it. I wake up every day and it's like a weight has been lifted. I go to work, I focus on my goals, and I live my life for me. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And that's enough. More than enough. Life kept moving forward, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. I had spent years being controlled by my family, walking around with the weight of their expectations on my shoulders, letting them dictate what my life should look like. But after the restraining order, everything started to feel different. I had a sense of freedom that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. I focused on myself more than ever. I threw myself into work, diving into new projects and pushing myself further than I thought I could go. Karen noticed, and she kept giving me more responsibility, more leadership opportunities. By the end of the year, I was leading a major project that had the potential to change everything for the company. The sense of accomplishment I got from seeing it through, from taking something that seemed impossible and making it a success, was indescribable. It wasn't just about the job. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. I had started to realize that work wasn't just a distraction for me anymore. It was the thing that grounded me, the place where I could focus, be productive, and feel in control of my life. And with every project I conquered, every goal I smashed, I built a confidence I never had before. But even with all that, I still had moments where I found myself looking back, looking at the empty space where my family used to be. I never reached out. I never felt the need to, but every now and then I'd catch myself thinking about them, wondering what they were doing. I wondered about Emma and Jake, if they were happy, if they were still living the life I once thought I'd share with them. The worst part was the not knowing. I didn't care about their apologies. I didn't want them to try and make amends, but I couldn't shake that feeling of loss. It wasn't just them, it was everything I had lost because of them. My idea of family, my dreams for the future. I mourned that, even if I didn't admit it to anyone. It wasn't until I made the decision to go away for a while that I started feeling like I was closing the final chapter of that part of my life. I booked a flight to Paris, something I'd wanted to do for years, but never had the time or the courage to pull the trigger on. I needed space to think, to breathe, to break free from the cycle of work and old memories. Paris was everything I needed. The city, with its chaotic beauty and constant motion, felt like it was exactly what I needed to shake loose the lingering feelings of guilt, anger, and loss. The moment I landed, I knew I had made the right choice. I didn't have any expectations. I wasn't looking for answers or some grand epiphany. I just needed to live, just for me, without the noise of the past pushing in. I spent a few weeks in Paris, immersing myself in the culture, exploring the city, meeting people who had no idea who I was or what I'd been through. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was just Piper. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or a former fiancé. I was just a person. I wandered the streets, ate pastries by the Seine, went to museums, and spent whole afternoons in cafes, just watching the world go by. It wasn't about finding myself. It was about letting go of the pieces of myself that had been weighed down by everyone else's expectations. When I got back home, things were different. I felt different. There was a clarity in me that hadn't been there before. It wasn't that I had all the answers or that everything was suddenly perfect, but I realized I didn't need to have everything figured out. I just needed to keep moving forward. The past was behind me. The future was a blank canvas. Back at work, I was given a new promotion, director of operations. The job was a dream. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had earned. But it wasn't the position that made me proud. It was the way I had gotten there. It was the fact that I had done it all on my own. I hadn't relied on anyone else's approval. I hadn't waited for validation. I had simply kept going, even when it felt like the world had crumbled around me. That summer, I took a trip to Tokyo for a work conference. It was a little surreal to be there, to be traveling to places I had once only dreamed of, knowing that I had gotten there entirely on my own. I took pictures of everything, capturing memories that didn't involve anyone else. The trip was about me and only me. While I was in Tokyo, I got a message from Sarah. I hadn't heard from her much in the last few months, but I knew she was always looking out for me. She kept me up to date with what was going on with my family. "I'm really sorry, Piper," she texted, "but I thought you should know. Mom and Dad have been trying to reach you again. They've been calling everyone in the family, asking them to intervene. They want you back. They're saying that you're still holding a grudge and that you've changed." I read her message and felt a strange calm wash over me. There was no anger, no frustration, just a quiet certainty. I had changed, and they didn't get to come back into my life just because they decided they wanted me there again. I didn't respond. There was no point. I didn't need to explain myself to them. I had built a life for myself, and I wasn't about to let them tear it down again. When I came back from Tokyo, I felt stronger, more rooted in the person I had become. I knew who I was now, and that was enough. More than enough. The quiet satisfaction of knowing I had stood up for myself, knowing I had chosen the life I wanted over the life they had planned for me, was the best reward. Every time I walked into my apartment, every time I sat at my desk, every time I made a decision for myself without anyone else's opinion involved, it was a reminder that I had won. And now, as I sit here in my office, looking out over the city, I realize that all the pain, all the betrayal, all the hurt, it was just the fire that forged the person I am today. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fair, but it made me stronger. So no, I don't care what they're doing now. I don't care if they regret their decisions. They don't get to decide what my life looks like anymore. I'm not just surviving, I'm living. And that, in the end, is more than enough. It's funny how life has a way of testing you. Just when you think you've got it figured out, it throws something new at you, something that forces you to confront parts of yourself you thought you had already dealt with. But I guess that's the thing about healing. You don't get to skip any steps. You don't get to choose when you're done. Life just keeps moving, and you either keep up or you get left behind. The months after Tokyo were peaceful, almost idyllic. My job was going well, and I'd settled into a routine that felt good. I was traveling more for work, taking on more responsibility, and doing things that made me feel accomplished. I had built a life that was mine, a life I could be proud of, and it was exactly what I needed. But there was one thing I couldn't shake, that nagging feeling that I hadn't fully closed the door on my family. I didn't miss them, not the way they had been. I didn't miss the drama, the manipulation, the betrayal, but there was still a part of me that wondered what could have been, what we could have had if things had turned out differently. I didn't think about it often, but it crept into my mind now and then, like a shadow that wouldn't fully disappear. Then, one day, I got a message from Sarah. I hadn't heard from her in months, and I knew it wasn't just a casual check-in. When I saw her name pop up on my phone, my heart skipped a beat. I braced myself for whatever news she was about to drop. "Piper," her message started. "I know it's been a while, but I thought you should hear this. Your mom reached out to me again. She wants to meet with you. She says she's sorry for everything that happened. She wants to make amends. She says she misses you." I stared at the message for a long time, the words sinking in slowly. I had been expecting it, in a way. It had been almost 4 years, and I knew they'd try to reach out eventually. They couldn't keep up the charade forever, pretending like nothing had happened. But still, it hit me harder than I thought it would. I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, I didn't want anything to do with them. I'd built a life for myself without them, and I didn't need them to come back and disrupt everything I'd worked so hard for. On the other hand, there was that part of me, the part that still wondered if there was room for forgiveness. I'd been hurt, more than anyone should ever be. But was it possible to move on? Was it possible to heal, even after all the damage they'd caused? I spent the next few days thinking about it. I had so many questions. Why now? Why after all this time? And what would it mean if I went back? What would I be giving up? I talked it over with a few people, close friends, colleagues I trusted, and of course, Sarah. But in the end, the decision had to be mine. It was my life, my journey, and I couldn't let anyone else decide for me. After a lot of back and forth in my head, I decided to meet with her. Not because I thought we could fix everything, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I wanted closure. I needed to see for myself if they were sincere or just trying to rewrite history. I needed to see if they could admit to their mistakes or if they were still too wrapped up in their own version of events. We set the meeting for the following weekend. I spent the week preparing myself mentally, making sure I was in the right headspace for whatever came next. I didn't want to go in with anger or expectations. I just wanted to hear what they had to say and see if it was worth giving them a second chance. When I showed up at the restaurant, I was surprised by how nervous I felt. I had no reason to be. I had spent years removing myself from their chaos. But now, here I was, walking back into their world, my old world. Mom was already there, sitting at a table near the window, looking smaller than I remembered. She stood up when she saw me, her eyes a little misty, and I could tell she was nervous too. There was an awkward silence as we sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "Piper, I don't even know where to start. I'm so sorry for everything. For what happened, for the way we treated you. We were wrong, and I can't tell you how much I regret everything." I listened, trying to keep my face neutral. She sounded sincere, but I wasn't sure if I could believe it. I had heard this before from both her and Dad. Apologies that didn't mean anything, apologies that were empty, just words said to fix things for them, not for me. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She nodded, her eyes filled with regret. "I understand. I know I've lost your trust. I don't expect it to come back easily. I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I've spent a long time thinking about what I did, and I know I can't undo it. But I want to try. I want to be a better mother to you." Her words hit me harder than I thought they would. But I didn't let them break me. I couldn't afford to. I had spent too long rebuilding myself, too long learning to live without them, to go back to that place where I was dependent on their approval. "I'm not the same person I was back then, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not the person who needs your approval anymore. I'm not the person who needs to fit into your idea of what I should be." She nodded again, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know, and I respect that. I just want you to know that I'm here, whenever you're ready, whenever you want to talk, or if you ever need anything." It was a nice gesture, and maybe it was genuine, but it didn't change anything. Not for me. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice softer now, but still firm in my conviction. "But I've built a life for myself. I don't need to go back to that. I don't need to relive the past. I've moved on, and I'm okay. I'm more than okay." She didn't respond right away. She just sat there looking at me like she was processing everything I'd said. Finally, she smiled. A small, sad smile, but it was real. "I'm proud of you, Piper. I always have been. I know it doesn't mean much right now, but I'm proud of the person you've become." I felt a lump in my throat at that. It wasn't the apology I wanted, but it was the apology I needed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had built my own life, my own identity, and I had done it without them. And that was enough. We talked for a while longer, but it didn't change anything. I left the restaurant with a sense of finality. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. The door had been closed, but I didn't feel the need to open it again. As I walked away, I felt lighter, like I had finally let go of something that had been weighing me down for far too long. I didn't need them in my life. I had everything I needed right in front of me, and that, finally, was enough. Story 2. "Is there not a work in London?" I stared at the email on my laptop screen, my voice hardly more than a whisper. My vision was packed with messages from Daniel to someone named Kate, exposing months of deliberate deceit. It was all just a lie. My spouse didn't respond. We had sold everything for the alleged fresh start, so he stood in our empty living room, and his quiet conveyed more than words ever could. "My name is Celine Harris, and until this moment, I thought I was preparing for an exciting new chapter in Minneapolis as a financial analyst at Parker & Reed. I had established a strong career over the previous 10 years, but I didn't think twice about supporting Daniel when he returned home 3 months ago, full of exciting news about a fantastic opportunity in London. That's what partners do, right? They have faith in one another. The first house I ever owned was sold with me. I gave away pieces of furniture that I had meticulously selected. I even sold the antique mirror that belonged to my grandmother, the only thing I had left of her. Daniel was certain that we must travel light. Now I understood why he had pushed so hard for me to liquidate everything. For what length of time? I asked, my voice steady, or now, as amazement started to give way to wrath. How long have you been planning this with her? Daniel shuffled nervously, his eyes darting toward his packed luggage near the entrance. Celine, How long? 8 months, he eventually admitted. Kate and I, it simply happened. And then the plan just sort of developed. Evolved, as if methodically ruining your wife's life was a natural process. I felt terrible thinking about how systematically they must have planned this. Awaiting the sale of everything, the conversion of all our assets into cash, and the removal of every safety net I had put in place. The money's already gone, isn't it? Even though I knew the answer, I still asked. I'm a financial analyst. I ought to have seen the warning flags. However, love blinds you, and I had trusted him completely. Daniel reached for his luggage and added, "You'll land on your feet?" "You always do." As he approached the door, something changed inside of me. There was one thing he was correct about. This time would be no exception to my habit of landing on my feet. As the door clicked shut behind him, I opened my laptop and began to type. Daniel didn't know who he was up against. Daniel and I met 6 years ago during a financial technology conference in Minneapolis. I recall being struck by his desire and energy. Despite working for a tiny company, he had lofty goals of being the best. I was unaware at the time that his ambition would eventually take over our marriage and everything else. In retrospect, I can see the red flags I ignored, like how he always appeared to take more than he gave. I had recently gotten a big promotion at Parker & Reed when we initially got married. Rather than rejoicing in my accomplishment, Daniel persuaded me to help him launch his own consulting firm using my bonus. "It's an investment in our future," he remarked. I trusted him. Although it was my first error, it was by no means my last. I provided him with emotional and financial assistance for years. I put forth extra effort to keep us afloat when his first business collapsed. I took out a loan against my 401k to finance his next attempt. Things would change every time he swore. Every time I trusted him. Last year, my cousin Nina made an attempt to warn me. She had mentioned Shalini on one of our coffee dates. "Isn't it odd that Daniel never wants you to be part of his business decisions? You work as a financial analyst, literally." Of course I stood up for him. "He doesn't want to burden me," I said. "In addition, he is my spouse. I have faith in him." Have faith? Now, what a stupid term it seems. Every symptom was present. The late-night phone calls he'd take in the garage, the abrupt business excursions that he could never fully explain. He began pushing me to sell my possessions months ago, saying that we needed to make our lives simpler. I had approximately $400,000 in equity from the property sale, plus another $200,000 from my retirement accounts and investments, all of it converted to cash, just as he recommended to facilitate the international transfer. All of it now gone. Transferred to accounts I couldn't track. I don't miss the irony. I spend my days analyzing financial patterns for multi-million-dollar corporations, identifying inconsistencies and preventing fraud. Yet I couldn't or wouldn't see what was occurring in my own house. But as I sat there in our empty rental house, surrounded by nothing but packed boxes and crushed dreams, something inside me hardened. Even though I had previously been blind, my eyes were now fully open, and Daniel would wish he had never misjudged me after what I was about to accomplish. As I delved more into Daniel's email history, my hands began to shake. Every communication exposed a new aspect of their plan. Kate was more than simply Daniel's lover. She was a former customer who had assisted him in planning everything. For months, they had been plotting their getaway and painstakingly coerced me into selling off all of our possessions. The wife has no suspicions. Daniel had written to her 6 weeks ago. She is too preoccupied with organizing our made-up London existence to pay attention to anything else. I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. The casualness of that word made my stomach turn. With my analyst's mind in full swing, I printed everything. As I was selling our house and ending my life in Minneapolis, their messages provided a clear picture. In Austin, they were establishing their new one. They had already used my money to purchase a home there. Of course, the deed was in Kate's name, dated just 3 days ago. It buzzed on my phone. Daniel texted, "I regret that this is how it ended. My lawyer has my signed divorce paperwork. This should be made quickly and neatly for the benefit of both of us, clean and fast." Similar to tearing off a Band-Aid. However, he had taken everything, so all I had left was an empty rental house and packed boxes. I was unable to pay. I read and called Parker. My hands are trembling. My boss, Linda, picked up on the second ring. "I need assistance." My voice cracked as I spoke. "Because of this, I am unable to attend the client meeting in London next month." As London does not exist, the entire tale came out. After a lengthy silence, Linda finally said, "I want you to pay close attention, Celine. What Daniel and his accomplice have done isn't just morally wrong. Criminal fraud is what it is. Now is the time to call the cops. Then call your bank. I'm texting you the number of a competent lawyer. Make use of it. Celine, too. Your employment is secure. Take whatever time you need." I felt the first tears stream down my cheeks. I'm relieved to have at least one anchor in my life, not depressed. The following few hours passed in a whirl of phone calls, banks, lawyers, and police. Every discussion emphasized the seriousness of Daniel's actions. However, I was eventually broke by a call from my bank. "I regret to inform you, Mrs. Harris, that you approved most of the transfers," the fraud agent remarked softly. "We are limited in what we can do because you voluntarily converted and relocated the assets." In the waning afternoon light, I hung up and surveyed the empty house, which was empty because I had purposefully left it naked for our new beginning. I noticed my image in the window. Something changed in my eyes when I gazed at my mirror, and I hardly recognized myself. I worked as a financial analyst with a focus on money trail tracing. Daniel had no knowledge of my contacts, abilities, or expertise. He believed he had shattered me, but he had just committed the greatest error of his life. Over the course of the next week, I transformed my cousin Nina's guest room into what appeared to be a detective's office. Printouts of bank statements, property records, email trails, and other documents were stacked on every wall. I remained up late, every night, following the financial trail that Daniel had left. One morning, Nina brought me coffee and said, "You need to sleep." She gave my dark circles under my eyes a worried glance. "You cannot continue in this manner." I answered, looking at another bank statement, "I can't sleep." Not in Austin, where they're having a great time with my money. The biggest payment, $380,000, which passed through 3 banks before ending up in Kate's account, had previously been tracked down by me. Their house had been purchased with that money, a fact that infuriated me. While I slept on an air mattress, they were most likely furnishing it with pricey furnishings at the moment. Everything became worse when my lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, called with an update. She clarified that the police are handling it as a civil case. "Since you authorized the transfers and there's evidence you knew about the accounts since he told me they were for our move, I cut you off. For our purported new life in London." "I understand," Sarah answered gently, "but proving fraud will be tough. These cases often come down to," he said. "And the paper trail shows your consent," she continued. Feeling discouraged, I hung up. I made my first error that night. I called Daniel. "This will not go unpunished," I said when he answered. He laughed, really laughed. "Get away with what? You voluntarily signed everything. Examine the documentation, Celine. After all, you are the financial expert. I'll fight this," I warned. "I'll bring you before the judge." "How much money?" He spoke in a soothing tone. Confident. "Face it, Charlene, it's over. Proceed." After he ended the call, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do yet. I totally lost it. All of the tension, rage, and embarrassment poured out. Nina discovered me weeping while sitting on the floor with papers all around me. I said, "I've lost everything. My retirement, my money, and my house. I've lost all I've worked for." Nina took one of the bank statements and sat down next to me. "Not all of it." She said strongly, "You still have me and your abilities and knowledge." One thing she was correct about, I was still competent. And while I dried my tears, a thought began to take shape. Daniel had deceived me personally, but professionally. Parker and Reed was where I was still at the height of my game. I had access to sophisticated financial tracking tools, ones that could follow money trails considerably more successfully than personal bank searches. The next morning, I gave Linda a call. "I need to take a few days off," I remarked. "I also need a favor." I told Linda about my strategy, and she listened. There was a lengthy silence when I was done. "You know what you're requesting?" "At last," she said. "It is against company policy to use company resources for personal purposes." "I know," I said gently, "but I also know how many times the corporation has saved millions of dollars because to my efforts, I've never demanded anything in exchange. So far." One more pause. At last, she replied, "You have 2 weeks off. It is up to you what you do with that time. Celine, just be careful. Additionally, avoid breaking any laws." For the first time in days, I felt energized as I hung up. Daniel felt he had won. I believed he had broken me. But a harsh lesson was about to be taught to him. A lady who understands how to track the money should never be taken lightly. It seemed odd to use Parker and Reed's financial tracking program after work. However, I ignored my guilt. Money was no longer the only factor in this. Justice was at issue. Something surprising about Daniel and Kate's plan began to emerge from the systems I use on a regular basis to track out patterns of corporate fraud. They became sloppy. I informed Nina at breakfast. They made beginner blunders, but they believed they had hidden their tracks. "What sort of errors?" She leaned forward to inquire. In an attempt to cover her tracks, Kate has been shifting money between accounts, but she has a habit of doing so every 3 days, always in specified amounts. The program caught up on it quickly, but that wasn't the greatest discovery. I found something that made my heart race as I continued to dig. Through his consultancy firm, Daniel and Kate had been operating a small-scale Ponzi scam. Prior to focusing on me, they had scammed at least 6 other people. As I went over the evidence, I saw that my hands were shaking. Names, dates, quantities, everything was there. They would persuade individuals to invest by using their charm, then show them fictitious profits for a few months before taking the money and running. They had other victims before me. Their biggest score to date was me. I gave Sarah a call right away. After I clarified that we are no longer considering a divorce fight, she responded, "This changes everything. We are examining investment fraud as well as wire fraud. Now, this is federal territory. However, I wasn't yet prepared to approach the authorities. I needed more proof, and I had another card to play first. I went out to Marcus, an old college acquaintance who now worked at the bank where Kate had opened her newest account. I presented my findings over coffee. He looked over the papers and murmured, "Jesus, Celine, this is serious business." "Yeah," I said, "I need your assistance because of this." It was like watching dominoes fall after that. Marcus reported suspicious activity on Kate's account just as they were closing on another investment property. This set off an automatic freeze. There was no better time to do it. After a few hours, a text message from an unidentified number appeared on my phone. "What did you do?" It was Kate displaying her initial panic attack. I didn't answer. Rather, I sent all of my proof, one by one, to the other victims I had located. With their own tales of treachery, they began to come forward. That night, Linda gave me a call. "Celine, the FBI has been in touch with us regarding several unusual transactions that you pointed out in our system." I inhaled deeply. "I can describe anything." "Not necessary." She cut me off. "I've already informed them that I gave you permission to use the program. They would want to see you tomorrow." That night, I sat in Nina's guest room looking at my laptop screen. Another nuclear option was at my disposal, an option I'd been saving. Daniel had made a crucial error. Since college, he has used the same password for his email and other accounts. I entered a few keystrokes to access his account. It was there, all of the talks with Kate, every lie they had said, every scheme they had devised. I downloaded everything of it. The forward button was hovered over by my finger. With one click, I could email it all to his whole professional network. I reflected on how he had chuckled over the phone, so sure of his triumph. It's possible that the previous Selena would have hesitated and showed pity. However, I was no longer the same Selena. I hit the transmit button. The reaction was terrible and swift. Daniel's career collapsed within hours of sending those emails. Documented evidence of his fraud plan was provided to his clients, co-workers, and business partners. He finally broke his quiet, which must have been caused by his phone exploding with texts. "I'm wrecked by you." He sent an SMS. "Are you content now?" I felt nothing but icy resolve as I gazed at his letter. "Daniel, no. I've only just begun." The following morning's FBI conference was heated. I carefully went over what I had discovered with 2 agents while we sat in a sterile conference room. The pattern of deception against several victims seems to be of special interest to them. "What you've discovered here isn't just one isolated incident," stated Agent Robert to Mrs. Harris. "This seems to be a well-organized criminal activity. I gave them my last piece of evidence, a thorough spreadsheet that documented each transaction, victim, and cash. They believed that their trail might be concealed. I clarified. However, money always leaves its mark, assuming you know where to search. Things took an unexpected turn at that point. A paper was passed across the table by Agent Robert. For the past year, we have been observing Kate, Miss Catherine Bennett. In 3 other states, she has participated in similar programs. My heart stopped beating. What? Mrs. Harris, she's a professional scammer. Furthermore, it appears that your spouse was more than simply her collaborator. She could have also been marked by him. The room began to swirl a little. I felt as though I had been struck by the agent's comments. Was it possible to play Daniel too? Did Kate influence him in the same manner that they had me? But before I could digest this discovery, my phone rang with an urgent message from Marcus. Kate is attempting to unblock the blocked accounts. She's now creating a scene at the bank. I quickly excused myself and gave Marcus a call. He clarified that she was threatening legal action, claims that she will sue the bank for improperly freezing her account. She is accompanied by a lawyer. I demanded that nothing be released. Now the FBI is engaged. There's more, Marcus added in a strained voice. According to her, the funds were a valid business investment. She has documents that have your signature. My blood froze. Daniel gave me a bundle of documents, ostensibly for our transfer to London, which I recalled signing. False pretenses were used to get such signatures. That could be true, I said, but it makes things more difficult legally. And I hurried back into the conference room where the FBI officers were ready to depart. Kate is currently with Meridian Bank. She's attempting to access the accounts, I blurted out. They looked at each other. Agent Robert stated gently, "Mrs. Harris, there is something we need you to comprehend. If you have done anything that may be construed as unlawful, all of my actions were lawful. I cut you off. All I did was follow the money. That's my job." But I could feel a knot in my stomach as they rushed out. Had I overreached myself? Had I been careless in my thirst for vengeance? I took out my phone and dialed my attorney, Sarah. I noticed another text from Daniel as it rang. "You don't know what you've begun. Kate is not who you believe her to be. Now, both of us are in jeopardy." I experienced a brief moment of fear for the first time since everything started. In fact, what had I fallen into? I have to talk to Daniel. After a restless night of considering my alternatives, I came to this conclusion. I needed to know the whole extent of the situation if Kate was indeed who the FBI said she was. Nina felt I was crazy to even contemplate it. "He'll simply manipulate you again," she cautioned. However, I had changed from the gullible lady who had put her entire faith in him. I made plans to meet Daniel in a coffee shop that was both public and crowded, close to Nina's house. I could scarcely recognize him when he entered. His normal air of confidence was gone. He appeared anxious and haunted. Kate has left. He sat into the seat across from me and spoke without introduction. Before the accounts were locked, she deleted all she could access. The home itself has been sold. "What is the sensation?" I inquired icily, being the one who has nothing left. He put a USB disk on the table with shaking hands. Every transaction, communication, and strategy she came up with was documented by me. I thought I could use it as insurance, but she's always been 10 steps ahead. I gazed at my damaged spouse, then at the drive. That's when I made my last move. As Daniel watched the color fade from his face, I took out my phone and called Agent Roberts. I stated on the phone, "I have everything you need," and I had a witness prepared to give testimony. As I hung up, Daniel's shoulders drooped in defeat. He was aware that it was finished. Kate had lost her cover and her companion, but she might have managed to get away with a little cash. Daniel, on the other hand, was about to discover that betrayal always has repercussions. With Daniel's testimony and the information I had obtained, the aftermath developed more quickly than I had anticipated. When Kate tried to take a flight to the Cayman Islands, the FBI followed her to Miami and arrested her. Her victims dated back 6 years, and her accounts were dispersed over 5 states. Daniel was given a lesser sentence of 5 years rather than 15 years in exchange for his cooperation. I sat silently in the back of the courtroom for their sentencing hearings and watched as they were both taken away in handcuffs. I experienced a deep feeling of closure instead of happiness or sorrow. The victims will receive the money when it has been retrieved. It will take time, but you should receive the most of your money back, Agent Roberts informed me afterwards. However, I was already over it. I was elevated to head of their new fraud detection team by Parker and Reed. Motivated by my discovery of a plot, I purchased a modest home in a peaceful area. It was nothing special. Mine, really. This time. On a bright Saturday day, Nina assisted me with moving in by hanging artwork and setting up furniture. "What's humorous, do you?" As I opened a bookcase, I said. Daniel used to say that I was too innocent and trusting. I simply trusted the wrong people, it turns out. Nina then inquired. I grinned, thinking of my new crew at work. I had rebuilt their lives from the ground up, and I had assisted other victims. I trust myself now, and that's sufficient. I lifted a glass to my reflection in the window later that night when I was standing in my new kitchen. She was stronger, smarter, and at last totally free as she looked back at me.